Hey, everybody, welcome to the Aligned Love Podcast. This is the place where I am going to help you find the one thing that you feel is missing: healthy love. I am your host, Lauren Zoller, and in this podcast, I will share with you how to attract love, live in alignment, and elevate your deepest relationships. So buckle up, get present, tune into your body, and open up to the possibility that you truly do get to have it all. Let's dive in. Veronica Rottman is the founder of Waking Womb, a practice that centers the healing of trauma through the nervous system with an emphasis on the female nervous system and women's experiences. For 15 years, Veronica has facilitated healing through a variety of somatic modalities, including yoga, birthwork, Reiki, holistic pelvic care, somatic experiencing, and somatic attachment therapy. She has traveled the world and has reached thousands internationally via her virtual offerings as well. She is a mom of two, a lover of soup, which I adore, nature, music, and more. Veronica, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you, Lauren. It's really so wonderful to be here with you.
Yeah. And I love, we were just talking about this before we started the show, that we get to hang out outside of the SE bubble because that's where you and I met. It's exciting.
Right? Yeah, here we are. Yeah.
I love it. So I always love, before we jump into kind of the meat and potatoes of the show, I always love to start the show with an intention setting because I am a huge believer. And I know that you're probably in this game as well because you teach yoga, but I am a huge believer that if we set an intention, we can have a desired result. And so I want people to know, what is the intention that you would really love for them to walk away with at the end of our conversation today?
Yeah, I think what I'd really love is for people to begin the process of orienting to their body as the source of how they relate to themselves and to other people. And from my experience, and maybe from yours too, Lauren, it can take quite a bit of time for that orientation to sort of like integrate, and just thinking about flipping like from this very mind-centered, hyper analytical view of relationships to the experience of how your body relates, right? And so
So
just like,
beautiful.
even if it's just like 4% today, right? Like we can titrate it.
Love
Just
it.
beginning to create that flip.
Yeah. Which is it's a difficult flip, right? And I know we're going to talk about this too. It's such a difficult flip to go from the analytical mind, conscious awareness, and to be in this space of going into the body. So I'm excited that that's going to be our intention for today. And that leads me into, I know that somatics and understanding, you started in yoga and you started in pelvic care. And if you were anything like me, and it sounds like I know you personally, you were embodying and integrating somatic practices far before we went through understanding how to truly reintegrate trauma in the body. But can you talk a little bit about how that all unfolded for you and how you stepped into the world of somatics and what inspired you to be in this profession?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I actually like to kind of go further back with this because I was raised in a family that was very body oriented, while a lot of my peers weren't. So like my aunt was a massage therapist and a yoga teacher, and there was a particular reverence that my family instilled in me around the female body specifically. So like I loved hearing birth stories. I loved hearing my birth story. I really was excited to have my first period, like that was celebrated. And at the same time, I had the experience of trauma, relational trauma. And there was something about that combination where I was, being encouraged to be in my body while experiencing the activation of trauma that led me in college. I had this moment, like an aha moment, and I was like, I'm pretty sure all of our relational conflict, all of our reactions to life, it's happening in our body. And I told my friend I was going to write a book about that. It's like, I know it's in the body. And this is way before I'd ever heard about SE or like polyvagal theory. I just intuitively knew that. And she was sort of like, yeah, okay, write that book. And then, fast forward to learning about yoga and birth, and especially somatics from like the SE lens. I was like, this is what I've been saying this whole time. I've been trying to say this. And so it feels like, in a way, there's another layer of like arriving in my life's purpose.
Mm.
And that, I think, continues to unfold, right? It's like a lifelong process, but this feels like a pivotal time of really arriving in my dharma.
I love it. I love it. And it's what I really love about your story too. I made my way into somatics in a different fashion, but also very similar in that I, practiced yoga. I was a yoga instructor and I was a dancer growing up. So I've always had that body-centered approach. And I do feel like there's something about being in the body that leads you to wanting to help other people to be in the body. But what's so interesting is that even knowing that as my background, like I was a dancer, I still practice yoga regularly. I often find myself escaping to the body. And so I want to talk about that because I feel like that's definitely something that we need to touch on. But I want to know a little bit more too, before we go there. Talk to me about the importance of really understanding the language of your body in being a female. And I know that that's a really broad question, but to know your nervous system, what is the importance of really understanding that language when you are, I mean, really for males too, but what's the importance of knowing it as a female?
Yeah, well, I really think that as soon as we're born as little baby girls, we're sort of swimming in a culture of the masculine. And the masculine is about bypassing the body. It's about pushing through. It's about forcing. And the feminine embodiment is about the being.
Mm,
It's about the experience and the emotions and really the subconscious. Like the feminine is the subconscious, and female bodies, when we have this, what I consider to be a form of trauma of, just completely abandon the feminine and perform as if you're in a man's body from the get-go. We're taught to do that, right? And so there is so much vitality and power we get to reclaim that, I feel like the patriarchy, it's like that word is becoming like such a trope now, unfortunately, but like we are swimming in it. And when you come back into your body, you get to heal the parts of you that were fragmented as a woman because you were forced to pretend that you're in a completely different nervous system, a completely different body than you actually are.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So big. And because this whole podcast is about relationships, and I work a lot in attachment theory, and you and I have geeked out about that. Let's talk a little bit about the breakdown of what happens, because you're right. So much of the way that we are conditioned. And again, I know we're speaking about women. There's a lot of conditioning in men as well. Like there's just the whole system is all jumbled and messed up, and people have really lost touch with their innate embodiment of who they should be, when they come into this planet. But let's talk about what happens when a woman is disconnected from that feminine essence and really gears her life more towards being in the masculine. I mean, I can talk about my own experience, but I would love to know how you work with women that way and what you've noticed in that realm.
Yeah. So when we are pretending as if we are in a male body and denying and bypassing the emotions and the sensations that come with, for example, like our menstrual cycle, our pelvic bowl, because the mere experience of being a woman in this world, in a female body, there's so much shame and stigma and objectification, and I could go on, that gets thrown your way. That is another layer of trauma from the culture, right? And we have to abandon ourselves in order to feel safe in relationships. So, like, for example, our emotions are often trivialized. We're told we're too emotional, when actually this is a perfectly healthy nervous system response to having to deny what we're actually feeling in order to, be appeasing to others, right? So there's this sense of disconnect from the subconscious. So if we think of the body, it is the subconscious, and the subconscious is driving all of your thoughts, almost all of your thoughts, your emotions, your choices, your reactions, and relationships. And when we actually get into the subconscious, into our body, we're giving ourselves more capacity to rewire what needs rewiring, so that it's not this unconscious pattern at the helm of our relationships. And this is true for men too, right? Like, this is universal. But if we're all only in our masculine, meaning we are at the tip of the iceberg only, like if you picture an iceberg, there's that tip, that's the conscious, that's like the awareness that we have. What sits below our level of consciousness is the body, it is the subconscious, and it's actually driving the vast majority of our experiences. If all of us, men and women, are only living in that top sort of peak of the iceberg, we're actually being controlled by this subterranean part of ourselves that, until in relationships, in both the relationship with ourselves and each other, until we get into that, we're likely going to struggle and repeat the same patterns. Yeah.
Yeah, so big. And I absolutely love that analogy you just gave, because if you think about it, if you're living at the tip of the iceberg and that's all that you've really given yourself permission to do, and someone else is there too, there is no depth. I mean, figuratively and literally, there's no depth to actually be able to connect, and there's no depth to be vulnerable, and there's no depth to find really what is underneath all of this. And I feel like and I think it's two things, right? And I'm curious your thoughts on this as well. I think it's definitely the way that society has conditioned us, and we're taught to hustle. We live in hustle culture. And I believe we talked about this a few weeks ago, that everything we do is built under urgency.
Yeah.
It's like everything, right? Which perpetuates the masculine, because that's what the masculine does, right? The masculine as an energy, it's penetrative. It is, you get shit done, and you're really effective at doing it. So it's definitely what we're around all the time. But I also think that there's this lack of education too. That's a huge component of people not really knowing what it's like to embody the feminine. And I'll give you an example. So kind of make you laugh, but I started my period a week ago. Right. And that whole time is just a sacred ritual. And on the first day, my boyfriend was like, let's go hike a mountain, And I'm like, no, that is the last thing that my body needs right now. He's like, well, what do you mean? And I had to educate him. Right. And he's a 40-year-old man, but there's just no education too on the female body and what it looks like to be in that space of nurturing. So I'm curious because I know that we have a lot of women that listen, and there are some men that listen into the podcast too. And this is an off the wall question, where do people start to really begin that transition into understanding the feminine and knowing the female body, even for men? Like, where do they start that education process?
Yeah. I love that you brought up the cycle, because that's really where a lot of my work is focused on. I had a lot of what I consider to be menstrual trauma, where I had PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I had horrible, horrible cramps and heavy bleeding. And I personally couldn't, the pill wasn't an option for me. It made me feel worse. Said with respect for however you choose to engage in, your reproductive care. And I thought, I'm just going to have to live like this. This is just how this is for me. And I think there's an over normalization of women's pain and suffering that is there too. That's a whole other can of worms, right? And it wasn't until I embodied my cycle that those symptoms went away. So I could try the herbs, and I love herbs. I could try the different womb care practices, but until I embodied each day of my cycle through the lens of the hormonal, nervous system based, emotional, energetic themes of each phase, that I actually started to thrive again. Not just because I didn't have like symptoms of imbalance anymore. I mean, that was a miracle in itself, right? To like not have cramps. I was like, what's going on? But also to thrive emotionally, to feel my nervous system regulate, because our nervous system is cyclical as well, right? That optimal rhythm is there, and that on a wider, more macro lens works week by week in a 4-week basis in our cycle. And so I think it really gives us a roadmap to feminine embodiment. And yes, we live in this machine that wants us to stay on the hamster wheel and just perform and be productive for productivity's sake. But what is growth? What is growth that it never ends in the body? It is a disease. Any growth that doesn't stop, it turns into a disease, right? So the cycle really represents this life, death, rebirth journey that we get to experience. And that is a gift. It is not meant to be a nuisance. It's not meant to be something that, we have to put up with. And I love that you're calling in Sean's, support with this, because we're taught that we're alone in it.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're told that this is something you do on your own and keep it secret. And actually our whole community thrives when we honor each other's cycles, men's cycles as well. Right. And so knowing, okay, around this time of the month, mommy, I have, 2 kids, mommy's gonna play, but she's only gonna lay on the floor and play. Like, right? Like my family knows that. Like, and it's taken some time. It's taken some time for my partner Mark to be like, oh, right, we can't just do the same thing we do every day. I'm not meant to.
Yeah.
But I love the cycle as a roadmap to building more capacity in not just your own body to thrive, but in your relationship as well.
Yeah. That's so big. So big. Cause I believe that and then I have another question around that too, which we'll get to in a second, but I believe that that's such a that is something that needs to be spoken in every relationship, because it's just not, right? I mean, Sean and he grew up around women. He was raised by really strong women for the most part, right? And that wasn't talked about because there is so much shame around it. And even being, raised by really strong women, again, the word strong, right. Yeah. Like that word strong is something that they really hold on to, which his mom had to be strong because of their whole background. And so there's just this, I'm feeling for myself, this invitation into really honoring your cycle and also bringing your partner into what that looks like. But that then poses the question, because I work with a lot of women who are dating.
Yeah.
They're not in relationship yet. And so I noticed when I was in the dating field, how I would date and when I would go on dates, I had to start to really build around my cycle, because it's, there's just certain times when you need to hibernate. You need to
Yeah.
pour into yourself. So what's something that you would say to someone who is dating and maybe hasn't thought about their cycle before and how it affects the way that they date and connect?
Yeah. I mean, I really think just starting with feeling it in your own body,
Mm.
right? Like, yes, I can give you the sort of week by week play of what's going to happen for you hormonally and on a nervous system level. But what's more important is how it manifests in your body. So it's going to be different for everyone. And I'm more curious about how it feels to you, because anytime we start there as women, we really build up a capacity to not feel like, oh, I don't want to pressure anyone. It's like, no, this prioritize how you feel on each day. And, for some people, this is going to look different than others. So, like, you might not have as much room in your schedule to like take a week off work or like, right? If you do, oh my gosh, get at it. But
Yeah.
like, but it might just be like, I actually do have to go to work today and rest, but I'm going to apply this sense of like, I am in my menstrual cave. Like
Mm.
energetically, I have this boundary up. I'm going to do a little extra to take care of myself. Like right now, I'm luteal, full on luteal. Like I have my tea, I have my heating pad, like with me as I work, these like
Yeah.
extra little measures of comfort, right? And I think that the more you tend to it on your own, even if it's like 10%, right? Like in a capitalistic society, actually honoring your feminine self, there's going to be resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Just is. And it's very much worth your while to start with just even little shifts. Just even just going, oh, I'm on this day in my cycle. What season am I in? So if we look at the seasons, right, your menstrual phase is your inner winter time. It's meant for deep rest, turning inward, deep pause, reflection, intention setting, actually. Because by day 3 of your cycle, the pituitary ovarian conversation is actually already starting while you bleed. So the pituitary gland releases what's called FSH to stimulate the ovaries to begin to grow follicles and mature and produce estrogen already on day 3. I think that's so magical.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so if we get really quiet in our inner winter time, we can hear this little whisper of an intention of growth beginning, of the rising up from the descent, right? And we can align our intention setting with our cycle on day 3 if we're quiet enough and we hear like what wants to be created with this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And then, through our pre-ovulatory phase, that dialogue, this positive feedback loop continues, and the energy of growth and inner spring around day 7 of a 28-day cycle begins, which it's that time of rebirth, of pleasure, of really nurturing whatever your intention is, so that by your inner summertime, around ovulation, you get to birth that out into the world. And so we really are meant to birth not just babies, although love my babies, have babies, right? But like we can birth what we want. Like
Yeah.
your cycle is a roadmap to harnessing your co-creative power
Mm.
when you align with it. And your body will support you in growing the life you want.
Yeah.
This has been everything for me.
Yeah.
Coming from really being disconnected from my womb and my pelvic bowl. So there's ovulation, and right after ovulation, fruition, the essence of yes, we go into our inner fall. During the inner fall, that follicle which held the ovum turns into what's called a corpus luteum, or it's like a mini placenta. It secretes progesterone, and progesterone helps us feel calm during our luteal phase. If we have nervous system dysregulation, this is going to lower progesterone, which is why a lot of us really struggle. Like when I had PMDD, PMS, mood swings, it's typically because our nervous system is not regulated.
Yeah.
So inner fall is meant to be like let's start to turn back inward. It's a time for truth speaking. So we actually have more capacity to see through bullshit hormonally, energetically in our luteal phase. And this is meant to benefit our communities, not be trivialized, not be stigmatized as like, oh, we're just a bunch of bitches or whatever. Actually, we have really valuable feedback during that time. It's like what my teacher Marissa calls our inner bullshit detector turns on.
Yeah.
And the more that gets thwarted and it turns into a lot of like self-criticism, at least that's how it felt to me, or explosiveness, right? Overreaction to your partner, to the people you're dating, right? So the more we embrace it and call in our partners to embrace it, the more they get to receive some really powerful truth. And we get to step into more of our power, right? So boundary setting is really great during this phase. Around day 26, 27, that corpus luteum actually dies. We have a huge hormonal plummet. So everything kind of goes on pause. And this is why it's so crucial to take that first day, 2 or 3 days of your menstrual phase to just rest. Little pockets of rest. Because we don't have the energetic buffers
Right.
to, yeah, perform how we normally do. Yeah.
Yeah. So big. So big. And I think even just that mini education lesson on how to really listen to your body. One of the questions that I was going to ask is that, you know, so many, and I want to know your thoughts on this. There are so many women out in the dating world right now who have this protective barrier around them that they need to take care of themselves and they need to be in the masculine to put food on the table. And some of them are taking care of children as single mothers. And there's this, it's almost like you said at the beginning, this, our cycle is it's a nuisance because we have to survive. And I was going to ask you the question, how does a woman in that space start to embody more of this when she is having to be so in her masculine to survive and put food on the table and take care of the kids, right? So I want to know your thoughts on that because I feel like it's difficult in today's day and age. But I think you also, in a way, gave us the answer that even just 4% of understanding where you are, and even if you are having to be in more of that masculine space, still allowing your the honoring of your cycle and where you are, I think that's really big. But do you have anything that you want to add to that, if knowing this circumstance of women who
Well,
struggle?
yeah, first and foremost, I really feel like it's important for me to name as a white woman that like there are other systems in place that are going to impact a woman who has to be in her masculine more. Unfortunately, women of color, yeah, single moms, like that is a real life thing that I don't want to paint over with like just like do some cycle journaling. Like
Exactly.
no.
Exactly.
Um, and the 4% is huge. And one thing that I think I could have heard from a really young age was that we receive through the feminine.
Mm,
The feminine is receptive. And we have this really, I think, skewed relationship with receiving. It can be, from an attachment perspective, really difficult, right? But when we step into our feminine, we're really magnetizing our desires versus having to strive and effort and force our way there, which, yeah, you know, as we know, is also a result of trauma, because trauma makes you have to try harder even when you're doing like simple tasks, like
right.
you know, even just chatting with a friend feels hard, right? But when we move back into the body, specifically through felt sense of pleasure, like the warmth in your chest, the expansion in your belly, these little micro moments of pleasure start to teach your system that you don't have to work so hard, actually. Even when you're working hard, there can be at the same time a coexisting sort of dual energy, if you will, of actually my shoulders don't have to be up by my ears when I'm typing. Actually, I don't need to clench my jaw in order to write this email, right? I guess it depends on the email, but um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we can, through the feminine, really start to teach our system that we are safe enough to put down the need to add all of this efforting. We can be in the flow.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so big. And even just, I think talking about the 4%, even just giving yourself permission to notice that can be a really solid first step to really just notice how you feel. Where can you start to attune towards more felt sense of pleasure and peace and calm and safety? And how can you get that to expand? I feel like that's, a great, great starting point for someone.
Yeah, and I think it can be hard because we think we need extra things outside of ourselves to
Mhm.
receive. And yes, having community is everything. So there's another piece to the puzzle, but your body has an intrinsic part to it physiologically that is already oriented to less effort,
Mhm.
to not having to exert yourself so much, right? You know this, but like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
that kind of vortex is there no matter how much you've endured. And even just relating to it in little amounts can be quite profound.
Yeah. That I feel is the golden nugget of this entire conversation is the reminder that because we often think about, oh my gosh, I have so much trauma and I have to regulate these responses and I'm in survival and what can I do to make this better and this better? But to just remember that there is a part of you that intrinsically knows safety and knows comfort and knows pleasure, and to remember that that's part of your innate being,
Mm.
that in and of itself can be really life-changing if you just allow yourself to sit with that and be present with it.
Yeah, I feel like that's like you should write a book on that.
Yes, for sure. That'll be your second book because you still have to write your first one and the second one will come. Awesome. So I ask this question on every single podcast,
Mhm.
Veronica, and then we want to know what's next for you. But I want to know, what is your definition of aligned love?
Yeah.
How does that land for you?
I've been sitting with this since yesterday, and I think it's rhythm. And that might sound like, what are you talking about? But when I am in rhythm in my relationships, there is a sense of ease. Whereas if I get pulled into the part of my nervous system that says you have to leave yourself, leave uh, how you feel to make someone else happy, I'm out of rhythm in that relationship. Or the opposite, right? Like if I'm like, this intimacy is just not, my arm are up, I'm no
Mhm.
longer in a rhythm with my partner. When there's rhythm, meaning we both can move in and move away, there's like a dance to that, right?
Yeah.
And a reciprocity too. So yeah, that's pretty like metaphorical, I guess,
I
but
love it.
it feels like a rhythm to me.
I
Yeah.
love that. Love
Mm.
it so much. So talk to me about what's next for you. Tell
Yeah.
everyone where they can find you and also how they can take advantage of what you have to offer and what's next.
Yeah. So I have my 10-week online immersion called Soma School starting in January. This is where you'll get to learn all about what I talked about with the cycle, with pelvic embodiment, the feminine, and from a nervous system, female nervous system lens. So we do dive into nervous system regulation because you do have your own unique architecture to your nervous system as a female that, understanding can be huge. We go into some attachment work. And I have lots of other offerings, but this is sort of like the bread and butter of what I offer. You can go to waking-womb.com to check that out. You can also find me on Instagram. Um, Waking Womb, I'm very active on
I love following you on Instagram. Yeah. I love it. Awesome. Well, we will make sure that we put all of that too in the show notes below. Veronica, thank you so much for
Lauren
being on the show and sharing your heart with me. And again, we're going to have you again on the show because it was just so wonderful. And I love spending time with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren.
That wraps up today's episode of the Aligned Love podcast. One thing that would really help me and the other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment wherever you tune in and listen. Also, make sure to link up with me on Instagram at Lauren Zoller, and please share this podcast with anyone who you think may enjoy it. Until next episode, remember, every transformation begins with one moment of awareness, and I hope today has been yours. I'll see you next time.